Welcome back to Natural 2, our TTRPG podcast and talk show, where I, Nathan, and my partner in crimes, James, discuss the various nerdy things of our favorite hobby. And this week we are going to try and cover, or at least explore, getting comfortable with a new character. I guess mostly pertaining to D&D, but I imagine the advice will broadly apply. I am fairly inexperienced as a player in this regard. I do have a little bit of a DM's perspective and a few different scenarios, but James is probably going to be more of the actual potential advice in this conversation.
Yeah, so a little bit of background. This is ripped from the headlines tonight. This is uh, something that I'm actually working on right now in the process. So you're getting the live update. A little bit of background. I previously was playing Valorant in our earlier campaign, and that concept was already like honed to a razor's edge pretty early on in the process. I had taken the concept for, let's call it a test drive at the table that I was trying to play at previously before joining this group. So it was a situation where I had this concept. I had already been thinking about it, and so I wasn't finished with it. So I had to bring it back out and inflict it upon this group.
No, I
Um,
remember just how, like, developed and ready you were just to, like, slam this guy in and be like, all right, I know what I want, I know what I'm going for, and that was pretty refreshing.
I'd been thinking about it for a long time, and was excited to roll him out in a game that I thought was going to go the distance. The contrast that we're drawing right now is in our current campaign. I have a character that has not spent so much time in the stew pot, and really started out as a sentence and didn't grow much beyond that until basically we had started playing, we had begun playing. And one of the things I'm going to talk about, what I'm going to talk about first, in fact, is that for me, that can actually be part of the process. To be clear, there's, no end to how to make characters, how to conceptualize them, how to roll them out. Everybody's different, and I'll do it differently from character to character. But some general ideas that I have, or what I tend to do most often, is to start with, I do not like to put down the stereotypical like 12-page backstory. I don't do it. And the reason for that is not just because I'm lazy, but also because you're carving this groove for yourself before anything has even happened.
Mhm.
You haven't met the other characters in your party. You may only have a page from the DM about what's going on in the world, so you're really cementing things that may not fit in that campaign at all, or that may not work with the chemistry that the group has. Or even just as simple as, once you actually sit down to the table to play it, you realize this isn't as fun as I thought it was going to be. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with doing that. Certainly, I know there are great characters out there that have these huge backstories, but I shy away from doing that. If I'm doing a backstory, it's between a paragraph and a page. And I consider a page to be a long backstory. That's a character that I've thought about a lot and have a really clear direction for. Valorant had a page. And my current character, Quinn, had a paragraph. And not a long paragraph.
Now, I remember I really enjoyed Valorant's backstory, kind of, I guess, handout or pamphlet, we're going to call it, because there was the more or less, like, loose history of his family, and then his actual, like, prominent characters in his past that you could pull off of, and you even provided, like, little pictures for them to, like, give a better representation, and that was really nice, because I always create like little cheat sheets whenever a player brings a character to me of like the very specific things I might want to go back and reference. And yours was kind of that enhanced and then kind of with a little bit of pizzazz. And so I really enjoyed that when we first got that back in the day.
And I think that's the best use of the backstory. Not to set your character in stone before the game even starts, but to plant seeds
Hmm.
that the DM and the player can choose to do something with at whatever point. I also don't put anything in the backstory that you don't want anybody to touch. It's there to be messed with. It's there to be pulled into the game
Hmm.
somehow, some way.
I think there's a
Uh,
pretty long conversation to have about bringing a dynamic character to the game. Uh, it's probably a whole other topic entirely, but that's something that can kind of interrupt this process before you even like get it started or get settled in it. Is if you bring a very static character that can't adjust, it might be really difficult to feel comfortable slipping into them or fleshing them out because you're constantly kind of rubbing walls or barriers that your character can't actually get past.
right. And to a certain extent, even with Valorant, that happened a couple of times. Even
Hmm.
with a one-page backstory, there were things about that concept that I came to the table thinking like this is core to the character that had to be sanded down in order to fit with what else was happening. Um, I didn't have to change too much, but even at one page, there were things that I had to compromise or adjust. Um, and that brings me to my second point, which is leave room to explore and discover that character in the game. I also, don't write a long backstory because in a way, in a certain sense, those first few sessions are the character's backstory.
Hmm.
Especially if you're starting from a low level. If you're a single digit level character, it doesn't make sense to have this novella of stuff that your character's done. So if you're starting at level 1, level 3, your character's backstory from a certain way of thinking is those first 3 or 4 levels. And you can use that time to explore different things that you think you might enjoy playing out, different personality traits or different goals or things that are important to that character. Be flexible and keep what works, keep what's fun. And if something isn't fun, you don't have to do it again. You did it that one session and then, I didn't like that. So that's not going to be, that was just a weird feeling that my character had that day. He was in a funny mood and that's not core to who he is. Um,
I
I
think,
think,
oh, sorry, go
no,
for
go
it.
ahead.
I think backstory is a little bit overused or used incorrectly, or there's a lot of emphasis on it that perhaps it shouldn't be. Realistically, I think when you're bringing a character to a game or a new game is, I guess, more important. You're really looking to develop your character's personality and almost like having the filter of how they function, how they process events kind of built up or established instead of actually bringing a story, right? Like your character's like early childhood and their most recent accomplishment isn't going to be particularly impactful, at least like in the very early senses of the game. So I think you should more focus on just bringing forth who they are to the table and then worry about like the minute details of their, brothers or sisters or family members or ex-lovers and all that kind of stuff, or the very, horrible event in their past, which you can always leave vague when you're writing the backstory and then develop it later. There's absolutely nothing stopping you from doing that. But I think that's kind of uh, a focus or a mindset that players get that isn't probably the most healthy, is thinking they have to come with this like gripping story or otherwise their character is not going to be interesting. So,
I draw a lot of parallels between an ongoing tabletop campaign and a TV series, a TV show. Um, Especially like older TV series, like from the days when people still watched TV and then to
mhm,
stream everything.
mhm.
where it'll run for 7 or 8 seasons and not get canceled by Netflix after 3 episodes. Um, those shows, I can't remember ever seeing one where the first season, and especially the first few episodes, there's some awkwardness. The actors and the writers are figuring those characters out. The character that you are watching in episode 1 is going to be very different from the end of the first season into the next season, because they're figuring out what works. They're figuring out what's fun to watch, what sounds good, and what doesn't. And that is absolutely what I often do with my D&D characters. With Quinn, something that I've tried early on was making him more loose, more lighthearted, for lack of a better word, but more flexible than Valoran was. Valoran was an extremely rigid character, and I wanted him to be. That's what I wanted to play with at that time. But now I wanted to go in the other direction, and we just finished a session where I went a little nuts and I leapt into this awful jambalaya of a Boston and a New York accent as I tried to scam one of the bad guys, very much in the style of like a Leverage or a Bird Notice or something like that. And I just decided to throw caution to the wind and just be silly and be goofy. And it was a lot of fun. And I'll do it again with this character, but I also think that in that one encounter, I think I've gotten a sense of where the line is for me.
Yeah,
Because
you
I
always got to
don't want
test
him
that boundary first before you figure out where it is.
exactly, and I don't want him to be a joke character, but I want him to be a character that can take a joke and make a joke. Um, so that's an example of that. So it's an opportunity to try things and keep what's going to work as a part of that character, and keep what's fun, and you can leave the rest behind.
I really
Um,
liked your TV poll because I think another parallel that you can really focus on as far as like serialized TV, and Star Trek is a really easy one to point at because it's almost kind of like the broad definition everyone points to. If you think of like the Star Trek crew, and I'm not intimately familiar with Star Trek, but I know enough to hopefully make this accurate.
I'll help you out.
The first few episodes aren't describing the crew's backstory in a bunch of depth, right? Like it's not like the first session of a D&D game where everyone sits down and is like, oh, here's my person's, drama and trauma and all this kind of stuff. The actual beginning of the show is developing the world and the setting and what's going on in the current like goal or quest. And then as the series progresses, you get certain episodes that might focus purely on one character and kind of develop them and focus on their backstory and explain some of the things that have been hinted at up until that point. And I think that's probably the best way to kind of handle your D&D character is you're not just going to unload all of this lore that you've built on the first episode or the first time they show up on screen. You want to hint at that as like people will understand kind of the loose ballpark that your character fits into, and then finally when we get around to having maybe a arc or a session or a, I don't know, quest line that's kind of centered around them, that's when you really get to kind of dig deep into that and establish it. Hopefully when you're already fairly comfortable with playing the character's kind of surface level interactions so that you don't have to worry about that as you're developing kind of the deeper core of the character.
And when the players and the DM who are the writers and the actors and the directors and the audience have a reason to care about that character, have a
Yeah.
reason for it to matter what their backstory is.
Mm-hmm.
And the last thing I'll say on this point is that it's also an opportunity because the DM is rolling out their world in the very similar way they're rolling out their circumstances, their NPCs, and the things that are happening, and it gives you an opportunity that you didn't have before the game begun to meet characters or see hooks and think I'm about that. I don't know exactly all the details, but that sounds cool to me. I'm gonna chase it down. That's now part of my character's thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's not something you can do if you've already set a bunch of things in stone before the game started. So that's been helpful to me breaking this new character in, is just playing, rolling the dice, meeting the world and the characters, and starting to get a sense of like, this interests me, that interests me. I want to make it part of my character's deal.
Mhm.
Um, the third thing that I do a lot is play the what if game with myself between sessions. I do this. I'm doing this more and more with Quinn now that things are rolling. I did it all the time with Valorant.
Yep.
Um, and that is, you're washing the dishes, you mowing the lawn, you're shopping for groceries, and you're thinking to yourself, what if XYZ happens? What if, the count that we're going to meet uh tries to stiff me on our deal? How would my character react? What would my character be likely to say? What would they do? And it's not only about strategizing, it's not only about figuring out how you're going to literally play. It's also about keeping it in your mind, keeping it fresh, keeping it on the surface who your character is.
Mhm.
It gives you the time to think about uh, how the character would react, what parts of their morality would come into play, all of these things. We have that advantage of our characters' lives only moving forward in these very scheduled pieces of time.
Mhm.
Um, we as human beings have an actual lifetime of experiences and learning and interaction with family and friends that inform how we react. Um, but our characters are constructs. They don't, we have to provide that, which means that we have to plan to be spontaneous in order to make the most out of it. We have to play the what if game so that when something does happen, we can react in character in a way that is true to that concept, in a way that makes sense, and in a way that makes the table go, wow, that was great. I am in this right now. This is actually happening.
To throw back to, I think, our first Natural 2 ever, where we discussed role playing in between sessions, I think that is something, it touches on a, I guess, like a benefit of thinking about the game or your character between sessions that is just incredibly vital or really impactful. It is so much easier for me to worry about a character's like thought process or mindset or reactions to things when I'm not under that improv pressure, right? Like if I can sit there and craft the response by typing it out over however long I need, it gives me a better chance to actually work through the character's thought process and then produce a more accurate result, which then translates to having that kind of ready come game time. And I remember when we did our back and forth with Valorant and whoever he was interacting with during our write-ups, especially I think Decker's sister, Danica, was probably the
Mhm.
one that I enjoyed exploring the most, or maybe even Genevieve as well, where in game, in time, during sessions, it was really hard for me to put forward their kind of distinct differences just like off the cuff. But if I could sit there and write it out and really kind of go point by point by point, that helped prepare me for the more lengthier, more emotional conversations we had between those characters, which I think probably all kind of culminated in some of the best RP moments of the entire campaign that I like kind of point to or reference to, where there is genuine, like heated back and forth conversations that I feel like are really, I guess, like true to form or like somewhat believable or realistic that I just like absolutely eat up. So that's, if you can think about your character between sessions, it's ultimately going to produce a better understanding of your character, which helps practically everything. So
And I want to be clear, this is a character exercise,
mm,
because you need to know why you're doing it, and the why is you are getting a sense of who your character is, so that when something happens in game, you don't have to stop and think like, oh, What do I do? Or fall back on your own personal, your own real personality for a reaction.
Mhm.
And I want to underline this because not one what if scenario that I thought about for Valorant ever actually happened. And it was
Yeah.
always stuff that I tried to extrapolate. Like I was trying to think ahead to, okay, when we get to this place and talk to this person, here's something that might happen and how would he react? But I was never right. Not one time. But it was still useful. It was still helpful because it still allowed me to think about who he is. And that made the interactions that did happen flow and have chemistry and just be, I think, entertaining for everybody.
Mhm.
So, my final point is that if you find yourself struggling, and I have been with Quinn, it's been, you know, for a variety of reasons, some having to do with the game and many not having to do with the game. Been trying to grind those gears, grind it till you find it, kind of thing. And something that gets me through from session to session and helps keep a block from happening is sort of like how I was describing you can find characters or things in the DM's world to latch onto. Again, be flexible. It doesn't have to be a permanent obsession for your character, but find something every session if you can and decide that's important to me. I'm going to interact with that. I'm going to do something with it. I'm going to pick it up. I'm going to play with it. And in that process, I'll find something. Something will happen that I can say I'm going to keep this, or no, this isn't actually who my guy is. And my example for that from our campaign is, oh, I'm drawing a blank on her name. Is it Clara? Alara.
Ayla?
Ayla. Ugh. Ayla, the secretary and major domo for our Adventurers Guild. Um, I was looking for something to do, and I just decided, you know, my guy is an ex-spy. He's his one of his tools in his toolbox is social engineering. That was something that I did know about his background coming into the game. And so in this situation, there is one female individual in the entire guild, either player character or NPC. And in very James Bond fashion, I just decided, you know what, I'm going to flirt with this character. I'm going to try to create, you know, a little spark here. Um, is there going to be a campaign-long romance between my character and this NPC? No, there isn't, and it
There
may
might
not.
be. We'll see.
There might be the possibility is there,
Mhm.
but that's not what I'm planning for, and that's, you know, it's not something I'm going to try to push the envelope on every
Mhm.
session. But for that session, it was something to say. It was something that I could say about this character. It's something that I could show about who he is, what he has done, um, in manipulating this NPC. I mean, it's manipulating this person. You know, not to minimize it by calling her an NPC. He doesn't intend her harm, not really, but he's not looking for love. He's looking for an edge.
Mhm.
And that's part of his habit, part of his training is to stack the deck in all situations at all times. So and that you just watched it right here on camera. That is not a sentence that I've strung together until this very second, but now that's going in in the binder for this character. Stack the deck at all times. Um,
I think that's a really good goal to have session to session because so often when I'm struggling to engage with a character that a player has brought to the table, it mostly comes down to them not offering up anything or engaging in anything. And I don't really want to use the term engagement because that means a lot of different things. But I think offering up is kind of the better way of phrasing it because if the character doesn't give you an in ever, it's very difficult to interact or give them anything meaningful. So if every session, no matter how small it might appear on the surface, if you take the time to give your DM the chance of like, here's something my character is doing or exploring or interested in or spending time kind of probing a little bit for, that's enough to maybe get the ball rolling on something or building something up that might be a bigger thing down the road. But if you never give that chance, you never have that back and forth, then as a DM, it's like trying to find like a crack in a smooth wall. There's nothing to do or dig into or grip onto. So yeah, I think that's a very good piece of advice is every session trying to find something like that to at least just explore it just a little bit.
It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to change your character's direction of their life. It's just something to make sure things keep happening. If you don't take anything else away from this conversation, if you don't take anything else, any other piece of advice but this, it is when in doubt, take one of the toys that your DM has put in front of you at the table and has shown you and play with it. Don't sit there and wait for them to try to make you play with it. Find something that they have placed before you and play with it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you keep doing that, you will have an interesting and fun character and game experience, like as not.
So I think I've been trying to kind of piece together my bigger observation as far as a DM, and I think the best way to kind of describe it in this topic is I've experienced, hopefully at this point, all the different varieties that a game might start, where I just ask people to bring a character sheet and we just roll with it, or we plan a campaign for months in advance and then try to have some sort of like well thought out beginning. So I've kind of had the whole gambit, and some games have kind of been more successful than other, I guess, starts or characters have been more successful than others. The one through line or the one thing that I've now noticed and kind of look for is you can almost spot the exact moment where the player actually buys into their character. I think that is the key, because I've seen so often players will bring a character where they like have every answer for like what the mechanics are, or their stats are, or their like background profession, or like all the kind of non-personal puzzle pieces that all fit together to make like the mechanic sheet. But there's eventually that moment where you kind of ask them a question about their character or their character's thought process or just anything somewhat adjacent to that, and you get a character response versus a player response. And sometimes it's obvious and it happens in session. There's kind of this like eureka moment. Sometimes it's between sessions and the player, will message you and be like, I was thinking, and you're sitting there as a DM like, oh yes, oh, this is fantastic. And I think the only piece of advice that would follow this is, as a DM, you can't force that buy-in, and you can't expedite its process either. The character really has to opt into it. And if you're struggling, if you have a party of people that are just, not willing to engage on that level or take that step, or they're all kind of nervous to be the first one to really get into their character, I don't know if there's a whole lot you can do about that except just trying to facilitate the best welcoming you possibly can for that transition, and just kind of letting them get to that point on their own, because it's a strangely vulnerable thing, as far as I can tell, for a player to accept that they have emotionally bought into their character to the point they worry about their safety and like how long they might live and if the game's going to last. So if you try and push that outside of the normal ways of getting there, you might be trampling some pretty uneven ground. But yeah, that's kind of my umbrella of this whole topic, is let your players find that place. And once they do find that place, be excited for them, but don't try and rush them there, because there's not really any way you can.
Yeah, there's some things just take time. A mother can make a baby in 9 months, but 3 mothers can't make a baby in 3. That's just not how it works. Also, if we ever have merch, I think our first T-shirt has to be "Facilitate it."
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, so often a lot of our conversations devolve into you as the DM should make sure that, XYZ is ready to happen. So,
well, hopefully you've gotten something out of this conversation, and hopefully you will like and subscribe, and uh, hit up those comments. Let us know uh, what you think, what we missed, what your ritual is for a new character. We want to see it.
yeah, I
And
personally love hearing about people's like bigger characters or the characters that kind of like look back on as like their main character. I don't think everyone has one, but it's interesting to see what people kind of put up as their like ideal situation.
and yeah, I think that covers it. So until next time.
Have a good one.